We're building scrap aluminum loads for gondolas on your layout on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more model railroading tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and subscribe down below and click that little bell icon so you can catch every episode. A couple of weeks ago, I showed you a method for making scrap steel loads for gondolas on your layout. Today we're going to be making some more gondola loads, still in the area of scrap, but we're going to be making loads of scrap aluminum. Now these are a very different looking scrap load and they take a very different process to make. But I'm going to show you exactly how I made mine. And I think you'll find that it's a process that's fairly easy and makes a load that you'll really like. I think you're going to want to try this technique for yourself. So let's get over to the workbench and I'll show you how I did it. One way that scrap aluminum is handled is that it is shredded at a collection point, compacted into bales, and shipped to a recycling facility. You see here an example of some of these bales ready for transport. They're often shipped by rail to the recycling plant in gondolas, which is exactly what we are going to model today. The bales can vary widely in size. I'm modeling bales that are 3 foot by 3 foot by 4 foot. For N scale, this 1/4 inch square basswood stock is perfect as it is very close to 3 feet square, so I only need to cut it into 4 foot scale lengths. This will make the base for my scrap bales. I tried cutting it with my chop it, but the stock was too thick and the basswood too dense to cut cleanly, so I resorted to using my razor saw and miter box with a stop clamped into place to mark the 4 foot scale length. It took 20 bales to fill my gondola, but I made some extra bales to stack up at the scrap dealer on my layout where these cars will be loaded. Once the wood pieces were cut, I drilled a small hole in the bottom of each bale and inserted a toothpick to serve as a handle. I could then stick the other end of the toothpick into a scrap of foam so that paint and glue could dry as I proceeded. The other key component to my scrap bales is shavings from a pencil sharpener. I sifted my shavings through a kitchen strainer. As I am modeling an N scale, the small shavings work the best, but in larger scale you would probably want the larger shavings. Bear in mind that as you go forward, these pencil shavings will soak up some moisture, which will cause them to swell up and the curly ones to straighten out. Once my pencil shavings were ready, I was ready to paint them. I used simple craft paint, metallic silver in color. Using a small container, I mixed a few drops of paint with an equal amount of water to make an almost wash consistency. I then put a small amount of the shavings into the container and mixed them together with the paint. You don't want so much paint as to make a soup out of the shavings, just enough to coat them with color. If you don't get enough paint in the mix to begin with, it's easy to mix a little more paint and water in the corner of the container and continue stirring it into the shavings. When the shavings were well coated in paint, I spread them out over a paper towel to dry. I spread the shavings out as thin as possible and teased them apart so they wouldn't dry into clumps. Setting the shavings aside, it's time to turn to painting the wood blocks. I simply paint each one with a full strength of the same paint that I used for the wood shavings. While waiting for all this paint to dry, I turned to cutting a base for my scrap load. In this case, I want just enough of a base to connect my load together, but not so much as to raise it up in the gondola. I used a piece of 10/1000ths styrene. I cut it to fit in the bottom of the gondola and then set it aside. After a couple of hours, the paint on my pencil shavings was dry. I used my fingers to break apart any clumps in the shavings stuck together by the paint, and then dumped them into a shallow container, in this case a paint palette. I used some spray adhesive to spray my wood blocks one at a time and then patted them into the shavings. At first, this gave me what looked like a great hairy ball on the end of a toothpick. I used my fingers to press the wood shavings into the glue, and starting at the top of the load and then working my way down the sides. Extra pieces of shavings I simply plucked away, and I continued to shape until I had a bale completely covered in shavings and pressed down to make it square. Shavings that extended below the sides I trimmed with a small pair of sharp scissors. There's no need to cover the bottom of the bales, as they will be glued to the base. I repeated this process for each bale, setting them aside to allow the adhesive to dry. Once the bales had dried, I removed them from the toothpicks. Now it was time to assemble the load. This is where I had to work very carefully. I needed to make sure the bale load would fit inside the gondola, so I dropped the unpainted base into the gondola and then started carefully gluing each bale to the base with a drop of CA. I had to work very carefully not to get too much CA on any one bale so as to cause it to ooze out and glue the load permanently into the car. I worked my way down the car, gluing the bales into 2 rows down the car. I was concerned that the bales would fit too tightly in the car, so I pressed them together as I went. When I reached the far end of the car, I realized that I had pressed them too tightly together and had extra room, so I redistributed them to fit in the car. Once all the bales were in place and had begun to cure, I removed the load from the car. I then went around the outsides of the load and added another drop of CA at the corners of each bale at the base to reinforce the glue joints. When the glue had completely cured, I used a small brush and painted any parts of the base that might show through the load with the same silver paint that I had used before. Once that paint had dried, my load was all assembled and painted, and I was ready to install it in my gondola. I think this load came out looking pretty convincing. Here is a shot of the car with the load in the scrap dealer on my layout. Again, this is another type of scrap load that will look great, especially for a fairly late era layout. They look very realistic, and they give your gondolas a purpose on your layout. I hope that you'll give this technique a try yourself. This process for making scrap aluminum bales is really easy and produces some great results. I hope that you'll give this technique a try, and if you do, leave me a comment and tell me how it goes. Have you tried a different process for making scrap aluminum loads? If so, leave a comment down in the comment section and tell me how you did it. If you found this video interesting, here's a link to some more videos that I know you'll enjoy as well. Before I go, I want to say just a word about my upcoming schedule. Next week, of course, is Christmas, and as I'll be busy with family and other Christmas activities, I will not be uploading a video next week. But be sure and watch on Tuesday, January 2nd, as I'll be uploading a new model railroading video and a bit of a new look for Ron's Trains and Things. I don't want to say too much about that, but you're going to want to check that out. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up down below, and be sure and share it wherever model railroaders hang out. Also, you'll want to subscribe and click that little bell icon so you can catch future videos. Finally, be sure and check out the description down below. There you'll find a link to my Amazon page and my pick of the week. There's some interesting products there about model railroading, video making, and all kinds of other things. But even if you don't need one of those products, if you do even your regular Amazon shopping through one of those links, then you'll be helping to support this channel at the same time. Also in the description, you'll find a link to my Patreon page, where you'll see the rewards for those who invest in Ron's Trains and Things on an ongoing basis. I hope you'll take a moment to check that out as well. Thanks for watching today, and be sure and watch again on Tuesday, January 2nd, as I'll be bringing you another model railroading segment and a new look, and I look forward to seeing you then. Lizzie?